All right, 7:54 now, and the U.S. Supreme Court making a ruling on what President Barack Obama has called his signature piece of legislation, the Affordable Care Act. The court's upholding the law that was passed back in 2010 and paving the way for universal health care. Yesterday, a D.C. reporter for Talk Radio News Service, Luke Vargas, was there for that landmark decision. He's joining us live from Washington with more on what he saw. Luke, good morning to you. What was the reaction there at the Supreme Court yesterday?
Well, the court still works in old-fashioned fashion here. They don't release their decisions to the media in front of the camera. So you have this archaic practice where the reporters have to run down the steps of the Supreme Court to the anchors who are there at the television cameras, and they have this 193-page brief that they have to parse through as fast as they can. And as we saw yesterday, some networks misreported the news. It's not until you get to page 30 of this ruling where Justice Roberts, after having struck down the mandate on 2 different constitutional grounds, says this is not the end of the matter, and then he finds a new argument by which the individual mandate can be constitutional and the law is upheld. So a lot of confusion there, not just among the media, but among all the thousands of people who were gathered outside.
Well, that certainly was the case for us here yesterday. We were looking at some of the Twitter feeds and the news services, and that's pretty much how it played out here locally, I would imagine, around the country at local stations too. A lot of people talking about what this could mean, this being a presidential election year. There was talk that if it went against the president, which many thought it would, that it would help sort of galvanize and energize the Democrats. So with it going for the president, is the thinking it could energize the Republicans?
Definitely in the short run. I was just watching the news, and someone from the Romney campaign had announced that they've raised upwards of $4 million since the decision came in yesterday. So in the short term, it obviously energizes the Romney camp, and a lot of people now who maybe were on the fence about Mitt Romney will see him as the savior, the last hope to somehow repeal Obamacare. I think there's another argument to be made, though, that in the long term, maybe the numbers of those opposed to the health care law have peaked, and that since many of the key reforms don't come into place until 2014, that until then, support will steadily build, or the people who are opposed to it will lose interest, and it won't be such a big issue come November. But that's still a relatively short time away from now.
Yeah, I got to ask you about this. Everybody who's a pundit, an analyst on TV yesterday and in the papers this morning, talking about the shock, the surprise that the Chief Justice, who's usually in the conservative camp, came out in support of this. Some saying he showed judicial restraint. What's been the reaction up there in D.C., especially from the GOP, about Justice Roberts going against the grain?
It's funny, there's still a section on the Mitt Romney campaign website where, when talking about his Supreme Court philosophy, he says, I will appoint justices in the mold of Justice John Roberts and the other conservative justices. Maybe he's wishing that's not there, but you ask for one kind of justice and sometimes you get something else. Justice Roberts, in this case, he says in his ruling, it is not our job, referring to the court, to protect the people from the consequences of their political choices. That's the Chief Justice. Alito, who wrote for the minority opinion yesterday, said basically, we think it's a bad policy, that whatever was passed by Congress with this Affordable Care Act is going to make it harder to do reform in the future. That's a much more political argument than the one here from Justice Roberts.
All right, well, we're up against the clock, Luke. We're going to have to leave it there. Luke Vargas in D.C. was there for that historic Supreme Court ruling being announced yesterday. Luke, thank you very much. Okay.